Okay, so getting into Jason Aaron's Thor God of Thunder, I guess, last days of Midgard, this story's actually split in two. And it's really kind of interesting the way this is done is because the part that we're going to be focusing on here is Thor fighting Galactus, since that's the part you guys care about. The other half of this is basically setting the stage for like Roxxon Oil to get involved with Malekith and his desire to launch his War of the Nine Realms and so on and so forth. And we'll wrap back around to that because this really kind of like ends Jason Aaron's run. But we will wrap back around to this once we pick back up with Thor with the release of Ragnarok. So we've got a little while. We've got a little bit of time before we jump back into Thor again. That is, we might start our X-Men run and then pause the X-Men run for Thor Ragnarok and then do all the Thor stories going up to this, which is Jason Aaron's run, and then go back into X-Men again because there's no chronological series of videos on the X-Men stories after the events of House of M, but we'll cross that bridge once we get to it. One thing to keep in mind, and I'm really kind of debating on whether or not this is something that we're going to cover because it's not wildly significant, it's just a thing he did in the future, but essentially Earth itself is completely uninhabited because of the fact that Loki basically obliterated all life on the planet. Now, this was covered in Loki Agent of Asgard, and Loki Agent of Asgard was basically designed to kind of emphasize his character. The problem with doing that is, in order to understand why Loki Agent of Asgard happens, we have to understand why he's young again, why he's trying to change his ways. And in order to understand why he's trying to change his ways, we have to understand why he was a little boy, why he was a chick. All of that stuff comes out of Thor Ragnarok. So again, Ragnarok was kind of like the House of M, or kind of like the reboot, so to speak. Because of that, all we really need to know is that Loki basically obliterated all life on Earth, and that was really all there is. But what this did is it set the stage for the arrival of Galactus. Now keep in mind, this section of the story takes place millions of years, or at least maybe not millions, but thousands and thousands of years in the future. So even if humanity hadn't been wiped out by Loki, it certainly would have died off at some point along the line. But the fact remains here that Galactus is still, again, very much alive. Now, this really, and it'll probably drag a lot of questions into fray, this really kind of throws into sharp relief the nature of Secret Wars. Now, something that I want to point out here is how Secret Wars fits into the chronology of events in Marvel Comics. And this is where Marvel tends to contradict itself. In Marvel Comics, you have a character named Cable, and Cable is a guy that hails from the future. The guy is a retconning machine. Essentially, if Marvel wants to change something, they'll have Cable just suddenly travel back in time for whatever reason, and he's like, I'm here to prevent this from happening. Case in point, Civil War. When the original Civil War event happened, Cable and Deadpool still had their team-up comic. Cable jumped into the past and said, hey, look, Mr. President, if you do this, I know where this is going to lead to, and you're not going to like it. So it was basically kind of fitting it in. And so the issue with Cable's character is everything that happens between right now at any given point in Marvel Comics and the future is all part of Cable's timeline. The issue with this, and the reason why it's so important, is because in this particular story, we're kind of left to believe that had Secret Wars not happened, then this series of events would have transpired some, 5, 6, 7,000 years in the future. And so the best way to think about this is that whenever you pick up a Marvel story and it says thousands of years in the future or something like that, and it's a story that took place before Secret Wars, then basically just act as though that story took place as if Secret Wars never happened, and for whatever reason, Secret Wars ended up taking place. And so because that is really the only way we have to kind of rectify these two things and sort of bring them together. But the fact remains here, remember, for the character of Thor, Midgard, which is basically Earth, had been his home for quite some time. Now, of course, again, this really all kind of cycles back to Ragnarok in and of itself, but at the same time, it's also just the idea of him having been a superhero on Earth, fought alongside, Captain America and the Incredible Hulk and so many different superheroes, having met Jane Foster there, having been a friend to humanity in so many different ways. It's really kind of him just sort of losing a piece of himself. And so what Thor routinely does is he travels back to Earth for no other reason than to just kind of gather his bearings and to just kind of, pay homage to the world that gave him so much and to sort of mourn over the friends that he's lost because of the actions of Loki. The problem with this is that Thor, alongside his granddaughters, basically showing up here, is suddenly met with the arrival of Galactus. Now, for Thor, this is as much an affront as it is really the final battle, because remember, as it stands right now, in terms of like the old gods, so to speak, which is to say, those who lived on Asgard as far back as Asgard goes, the idea here is that Thor is really the last of the old Asgardians, and Earth is the last refuge. It's really the one thing that he can't let go. And so because of this, he actually banishes his granddaughters away. Now, this makes sense because you have to keep in mind, in the mind of Thor, he's fought Galactus so many times, and while his granddaughters know who Galactus is, they are not prepared for the kind of power that Galactus possesses. Now, something else to point out here is Jason Aaron didn't just arbitrarily grab Galactus. He wasn't just sitting and like, you know what, I think we should have some kind of a villain. Who are we going to use? Well, let's use Galactus. In truth, Galactus and Thor go way back, and just in the realm of Marvel Comics, the origin of Galactus first appeared in the Thor comics. I want to say it was 161 and around 62, the fact remains here that with regards to Galactus and Thor, their history is extremely rich. I mean, they fought side by side to defeat Ego, the living planet. They've been enemies and they've been allies. And so because of this, Thor is well aware of how powerful Galactus is, but Thor is not without his own capabilities. Keep in mind, Thor is currently in possession of the Thor Force. Now, when it comes to the Asgardian mythos, and when it comes to Marvel Comics, the concept of the Odin Force, or the Thor Force, or whatever we want to call it, is simply just a source of power. It's not like it is a well. It's basically just the power he possesses. Now, with Odin, it's a little more straightforward. With Odin, his brothers had previously died alongside Odin, facing off against Surtur, which is kind of like this mortal enemy. It's the arch enemy of Odin, and he's actually the guy that killed Odin going into Ragnarok. But the fact remains here that the brothers of Odin basically died and their life force merged with him and gave him the Odin Force. And so it was really kind of Marvel's way to just explain, here's why Odin is so powerful. And so it's almost as if it was just kind of powers that were bestowed upon him. But again, it's still kind of murky. It's not really clear cut. There's no definitive explanation. Now, this is something that can be passed on from person to person. So it's almost like a power that he can remove from himself and give to somebody else. It's actually what happened during the events of Ragnarok. Thor basically spoke directly with the Odin Force. So it is an actual tangible source of energy that can exist outside of Odin. It's just with Odin all the time. And so whenever he uses it to its completion or uses any fraction of it, he has to go into the Odin sleep to basically recharge that power. But the fact remains here that Thor, with Odin having died somewhere along the line, Thor is now in possession of this force of energy. And so effectively he now has the Thor Force. And this is insane because the Odin or Thor Force basically allows either one to do whatever it is that they want to do at any particular point in time, shy of warping reality on a universal scale. It basically just amplifies their existing powers in the extreme. The funny thing about this, though, is that as powerful as Thor is, he's not on the same level as Galactus. Because remember, Galactus is a force of nature. I mean, you're talking about a being with hitherto unrivaled power, with the exception of the highest ranking cosmic entities. And even then, they dare not try to destroy Galactus, because if Galactus were in a hungered state, let's say, for example, Galactus was basically ravenous, he was absolutely feeding, he was dying for something to eat, he could probably lay waste to a litany of different things. But if Galactus is completely full, if Galactus is totally charged with energy, if he were a battery and he's at 100%, I would dare say there's almost no one who could stand in his way, barring maybe Eternity himself, and even then, it would probably be a pretty formidable challenge. And so, because of that, Galactus is not someone to be trifled with here. Now, the cool thing is we get this really, really beautiful conversation between the two of them. And the idea here is that, Thor's question is, why are you going to consume this world? This world is half dead. I mean, it'll only ever give you really half the sustenance you need. It would be like eating a half-eaten sandwich. Why eat a half-eaten sandwich when you can go eat a whole sandwich, go to another planet that's rich with life, take that planet? There's no reason for you to take Earth. But for Galactus, it's more than just consuming a planet, right? Like, it's more than just saying, well, I'm hungry right now, I'm gonna go eat a planet. For Galactus, it's consuming Earth. Because remember, Galactus and Earth have a very close history. I mean, Galactus' first appearance, in Marvel Comics, came by way of the Silver Surfer arriving on Earth, telling the Fantastic Four, Galactus is coming and he's going to consume your planet and there's nothing you can do to stop him. And then, the Silver Surfer and the Fantastic Four banding together to defeat Galactus by way of using the Ultimate Nullifier, or at least threatening to use the Ultimate Nullifier. But time and time again, Galactus has shown up on Earth with the intention to conquer it. And time again, the Earth superheroes have basically stopped him. And so for Galactus, it's basically saying, I finally get the planet that I've been wanting to consume this entire time. It is not necessarily a life-rich planet. This planet is basically dying. But for me, it's really more of just the principle of the thing, and that's kind of the irony here, because what it does is it really shows how powerful Earth was in a lot of different ways. And that was something that had been touched on time and time again. I mean, Thanos has referenced that over and over again. The different alien races in Marvel Comics at some point along the line, the Shi'ar Empire, the Kree, the Skrulls, the Badoon, they've all talked about that time and time again. The Earth is home to some of the universe's most powerful beings, but the Earth is also filled with people who still live in a very primitive capacity, which is to say politics run the show and different things like that. And so the Earth was always viewed as a very dangerous place, because if one of the superheroes like Franklin Richards managed to lose control of his powers, he could wipe out everything in existence, to say nothing of people like the Molecule Man Owen Reese. So again, it's really kind of a cool scenario here with regards to the nature of the Earth and how it all functions. Now, of course, this leads into a direct conflict between Thor himself as well as Galactus. And so again, this is really kind of cool, because it's basically like this last stand. It's really Thor doing everything he can to try to keep this planet planet alive. The problem here is that as capable as Thor is, at the end of the day, he's no Odin. He's basically being toppled at every single turn. Now, in some ways, we could say this is Jason Aaron just nerfing the power of the Thor force, just sitting down and saying, okay, look, we're going to reduce this power, right? It's not nearly on the same level as Odin. And to a degree, that might be the case. I would say this is just Jason Aaron writing the story for the sake of writing a great story, which is exactly what he does. It's absolutely amazing. But in the middle of all this, Thor, again, going head to head against Galactus, is ultimately toppled and actually just kind of kicked off the planet and just sort of sent flying. Now, again, this is cool because despite the fact that Thor is not as powerful as Odin was, it's still an incredible fight. Galactus is relishing in this, right? I mean, when you're Galactus and you've been traveling around the universe for billions of years and you show up on somebody's planet and they fire off their little weapons which tantamount to throwing toothpicks at a hurricane, you kind of get bored of the idea that no one can put up a real challenging fight. But then here you come to Earth, trying to conquer this planet that stood against you for so long, and then you find one god left with an insane amount of power and you relish in the challenge. You're like, finally, I have something to keep me entertained. So it's really kind of a cool scenario. Of course, once Thor is basically kind of cast out of Earth or cast out of Midgard and sent into the depths of space, it allows Galactus to begin going through and consuming the planet. Now, again, the cool thing about this is that while all this is happening, we're suddenly met with the arrival of Thor's granddaughters. Now, in my rundown video, and this is one of the funny things, it was like, hey guys, we're back from shopping. But this is one of the coolest moments in the story because Thor's granddaughters are badass. But not only that, one of them looks like they're wielding Stormbreaker. Now, Stormbreaker, for those of you guys who don't know, is basically the hammer of Beta Ray Bill. And Beta Ray Bill, the reason why fans love him so much, and the reason why so many people are like, put him in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is because Beta Ray Bill is the first person to have ever picked up Thor's hammer. And it was a huge moment when it happened. Nick Fury contacts Thor, says, hey, look, there's a ship coming over here to Earth. Thor goes to investigate. Beta Ray Bill basically is part of his race, or at least is one of his, as his race's main protector, the protector of the Corbinites, comes across Thor, fights against him, and then picks up his hammer. It was mind-blowing. It was just like, oh my god, that's never happened before. And so it was a great big huge moment, and it set the stage for Marvel to begin introducing these moments here and there when someone other than Thor picked his hammer up. And it was always a really, really cool moment whenever it happened. But because of everything that had taken place, Odin had basically hosted a contest between Beta Ray Bill and Thor to determine who was the most worthy. And because of the fact that Beta Ray Bill had proved himself to be an honorable warrior, because his conflict with Thor was not due to villainy, but because of the fact that he was a protector, Beta Ray Bill was given his own hammer fashioned by the dwarves at the request of Odin and was called Stormbreaker. And so again, it's a really, really cool moment. Of course, there's the axe of Jarnbjorn, there's the mace. I mean, there's all different kinds of little trinkets and so on. And it really kind of shows us that Thor really is the last of the gods. There are no other gods left in terms of the traditional pantheon. The cosmic entities still exist out there. But at the end of the day, the granddaughters of Thor, while they're not necessarily able to topple Galactus, and we wouldn't expect them to, they're able to put up a pretty significant fight. A lot more than we would expect, a much greater conflict than we would expect to see here. Now again, this is really kind of Jason Aaron delving into the idea that there are still really those individuals out there that are part of the Asgardian pantheon that do the best they can in terms of holding off various threats. But it's also the notion that the granddaughters of Thor follow very much in his footsteps. They're just as capable as he is in terms of straight up battles. And so of course, following this quick little skirmish between them, we end up jumping back to Thor himself and finding out that he effectively transitions to the furthest part, or ends up in the furthest part of the universe where Gorr the God Butcher had essentially been left, where he had been destroyed, with the Necrosword just sort of sitting out there in the middle of nowhere. And so what this does is it basically allows Thor to grab this sword, kind of harkening back to when he had absorbed the sword and when he had both hammers at the same time, and really just kind of realize this is basically the only way to take out Galactus, to basically use this sword that's designed to kill gods. Now, what this does is it basically gives us this little bit of information that tells us that the Necrosword was designed for a myriad of different purposes, that the sword is designed to kill gods, but is very much one of these weapons where its capabilities and its level of power is relative to whatever it's going against, or at least that seems to be the case. And so when Gorr the God Butcher is using it to kill gods, the weapon has enough power to kill gods. But when Thor is using the Necrosword, it amplifies his existing powers and allows him to take on Galactus. Now at this point, Galactus is in a pretty weakened state, and that's the other half of this equation. Galactus, whenever it is that he uses his power cosmic, it's just like a battery, right? It's not an infinite source of power. It's not like telepathy, it's not like the optic beams in Cyclops' eyes, it is a finite amount of power. It's not unlimited. And so as Galactus uses the power cosmic, it's like a battery that's just kind of slowly draining. Now, the other half of this is that the hungrier Galactus gets, the more desperate, the more ravenous, and the more dangerous he gets, the lower his patience get. And so if Galactus, for example, had showed up on Earth and was absolutely starving and this conflict had started, it never would have gone on this long. He would have just been like, and you're done now. And he would have just, obliterated Thor out of existence, killed his granddaughters when they showed up. This thing would have been 3 pages long. And then Galactus would have consumed the Earth, and that would have been it. But the fact that he's getting hungrier, the fact that he's using more of his powers means that now he's beginning to get more irritated and he's beginning to get more desperate. Now, this is kind of the cool thing here, is because once Thor arrives back on the scene with this Necrosword, he absolutely decimates Galactus. I mean, he literally just kind of plunges the sword right through him, and that's really about it. Now, again, this is kind of a quick ending. I mean, it's not something grandiose, it's not something absolutely insane. Things come to an end quick, fast, and in a hurry. But it is this idea that with the Necrosword, Thor essentially has a power of 1,000 gods, and going through, kind of declaring himself Thor the Destroyer, fighting against Galactus, and basically taking Galactus down. What this does is it basically just kind of sends Galactus running. Sends him basically saying, okay, look, this battle is far more than it's worth. I mean, you're really more of a hassle than you're worth at this point. Now, this is also compounded by the fact that Galactus' physical form is absolutely tattered. I mean, it's almost in complete and total ruins just because of the fact that the battle's been so extreme. So again, at this point in this conflict, we're talking about a level of power that's so high up there that normal people couldn't even fathom what it is that's going on. But what it does is it also sits down and it says, even if Thor right now is not strong enough to go against Galactus, he will be. He will face off against Galactus somewhere along the line, and he will probably be successful in doing so. The other half of this is that following this skirmish, Thor actually bleeds onto the ground of Earth, and the Earth begins to just repopulate and regrow. Now, this is not just a random thing. This is not Jason Aaron just saying, yeah, man, like the blood of gods repopulates Earth. Thor also has the Thor Force, so he has the entire energy of Odin imbued to himself. The other half of this is that Freya is not the biological mother of Thor. The biological mother of Thor is Gaia, basically the physical manifestation of Mother Earth. And so because of that, Thor is basically taking the life energy of Gaia and just kind of throwing it out there on Earth. That's essentially what's happening. What this tells us is that somewhere along the line, the Earth will return to its normal self. I mean, the Earth will, just kind of regrow, and populace will begin to come back, and, humans will begin to grow, and so on and so forth. We don't know how long that process will take, but we know that it will. But with the Earth basically having been restored, the rivers and streams and so on and so forth, we actually end up picking up with this epilogue. And what we find out is that with this all-black Necrosword basically having been, attached to Galactus, that Galactus himself actually ends up just sort of evolving and kind of growing and imbuing himself with the Necrosword, and then simply goes forward as the Butcher of Worlds. The sad thing about this is we never find out what happens next. That's the worst part about all that, because I was like, I really want to see like Galactus, the Butcher of Worlds. Like, I really want to see that happen. I really want to see what ends up taking place here. But the problem is we don't. We never get to see that. We never actually get to see what takes place. Instead, Galactus is just kind of forced to consume Mars, and that's really about it. But in any event, if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. But yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.